Flames roared through the Palace of Embers, the heart of Seralune's divine kitchens. The air shimmered with incense and tension, the kind that could scorch kingdoms or forge legends. At the center of the inferno stood Calith Draven, the alpha of fire and flavor, chosen by the gods to feed kings and silence storms. His knives sang like silver hymns, his every movement a prayer to perfection. None dared meet his gaze until he arrived. By dawn, one would master the flame, and the other would be consumed by it. Across the marble expanse, where light bent to heat, a young prodigy walked into the hall like a storm the Alpha could not command. Arian Solvane, born of the sun's defiance, son of no name, eyes bright with rebellion. His apron was torn, his hands scarred, but his fire, untamed. Their eyes met through the blaze. The ovens flared brighter, as though the flames themselves recognized their match. Rivals, someone whispered, but it felt like prophecy. Would you dare taste a love that could burn kingdoms to ash? Tell me in the comments below. And if your heart longs for stories where fate and fire collide, subscribe. And return to the Palace of Embers, where every recipe hides a secret, and every secret can burn. When Ariane's ladle struck Calith's knife, sparks cascaded like stars, scenting the air with scorched sugar and fate. The Alpha should have been furious, but instead, he hesitated. For in that brief touch, he felt something he had never tasted before. Something forbidden, and when Calith caught Ariane's trembling hand before it grazed the open flame, time broke, the fire bent inward, the kitchen fell silent, and the world held its breath, because the heat between them had nothing to do with the fire. The world stayed still after that touch. Even the flames seemed afraid to move, their glow dimming around Calith Draven and Arian Solvane, as though the fire itself bowed to the heat between them. Calith's hand lingered over Arian's wrist, just inches, but too close for reason. The scent of sugar and smoke coiled between them like a living thing. For the first time in years, Calith's control trembled. He withdrew sharply, his knife clattering against marble. "Return to your station," he said, voice clipped, brittle, "and remember where you stand." But Arian only smiled, a flicker of sunlight through shadow. "I do, right where the fire burns hottest." Then he turned back to the stove, unbothered, reckless, alive. That night, the kitchens of the Palace of Embers did not sleep. Calith remained after the others had gone, perfecting a dish he no longer cared to eat. He told himself it was discipline, but every slice, every simmered note of spice, whispered the same name, Ariane. When dawn spilled across the tiles, he found himself watching the boy again. Ariane moved through the kitchen as if born of rhythm, bare arms catching light, hair damp with sweat, expression fierce with purpose. He did not cook like a servant. He cooked like someone daring the gods to strike him down. Calith felt something between envy and awe. And when Ariane broke the silence with a low hum, his tone rolling like sunlight on water, the Alpha's pulse matched it. "Your cuts are uneven," Calith said finally, stepping behind him. Ariane turned, blade still in hand. "And your perfection tastes like ash." Their eyes locked again. The flames flared higher. Neither moved back. "Do you think the gods chose you because you were flawless?" Ariane whispered. "Or because they wanted to see if you could break?" Calith's throat tightened. "Watch your tongue." "I'd rather you watch my hands," Ariane murmured, turning to stir a cauldron of crimson glaze. The Alpha should have left, should have commanded him out, but instead, he stood watching as Ariane lifted a spoon, dipped it in the molten syrup, and held it toward him. "Taste," Ariane said softly. Calith hesitated. His pride said no, but something older, deeper, reached for the spoon. The moment the glaze touched his lips, warmth burst through him. The flavor wasn't sweet, it was alive. A storm of citrus, heat, sorrow, and light. For a second, he saw flashes. A boy cooking in alley smoke, laughter amid hunger, the ache of survival. Arian's memory, Arian's soul. The Alpha staggered back, heart pounding. What did you— Nothing you didn't ask for, Arian replied. His eyes glowed faintly in the firelight. You wanted control, but everything you taste, you own. Didn't you ever wonder what that power does to those beneath you? Caliph turned away, but the flavor wouldn't fade. It burned under his tongue like truth. He plunged his hands into a basin of ice water, desperate to cool the pulse in his veins. The ice hissed, then melted instantly. Arian chuckled behind him. Seems even water obeys your fire, Alpha. Caliph spun, anger finally catching flame. You will learn your place. Arian took a step forward, close enough for Caliph to see the tiny burn scars tracing his wrists like constellations. Maybe you'll teach me then, or maybe I'll teach you what it means to cook with heart. Their breaths mingled. Heat licked the air. Caliph's hand twitched. He wanted to push him away, but his body betrayed him. He could feel Arian's warmth, the tremor of life pulsing just inches away. Do you even know what you've done? Caliph whispered. Arian smiled faintly. I've reminded you that perfection without passion is hollow. Silence stretched, long, heavy, magnetic. The only sound was the quiet rhythm of two hearts beating out of sync, trying to find the same tempo. Then, without warning, Arian reached past him, grabbing a copper pan from the shelf. His sleeve brushed Caliph's arm. A single, accidental graze. The air shimmered gold. Magic pulsed. The metal in their hands glowed faintly. Every flame in the kitchen bent toward them, flickering as though drawn by something unseen. Caliph froze. You— Arian stared, wide-eyed. Did you feel that? The Alpha swallowed hard. It's nothing. But they both knew it wasn't. When the others returned, the kitchen was strangely quiet. No one spoke, yet everyone felt it. A charge, like lightning, beneath the marble. Caliph watched Arian from the shadows, the boy's laughter echoing against the copper walls. He had never met someone who could turn defiance into beauty. Later that night, alone again, he found the same crimson glaze on the counter, left uncovered. He lifted the spoon, the same one Arian had used. The flavor still burned, still alive, still haunting. He whispered to himself, voice barely audible, "It's impossible." And yet, as the fire flickered low, the Alpha's heart began to burn. "It's impossible," Caliph whispered to the empty kitchen, the spoon cooling in his hand. The word didn't leave when he set the spoon down. It stalked him through the corridors like a shadow with a heartbeat. By dawn, it had grown teeth. A bell tolled, 3 measured chimes that did not belong to the kitchens. Court summons. Servants parted as Caliph strode through the palace galleries, their heads bowed, but their eyes bright with rumors. The Palace of Embers inhaled and exhaled around him. Old stone, warm as skin. Flues whispering, banners breathing spice. He moved as he always had, commanding, composed, yet the world would not stop tilting toward a single center of heat that was not his own. Arian Sylvain. At the threshold of the Oracen court, 2 bronze doors stood carved with the emblems of every sovereign chef who ever ruled flame. Circles, knives, constellations. Caliph pressed his palm to the seam. The metal was cool, unpersuaded by his fire. The doors opened. Gold met him like a blow. The chamber dazzled with mirrored walls and tiers of gilded thrones. Light fractured into 1,000 versions of truth, none of them kind. The councillors were already seated, a ring of faces lacquered with power. At their center, Lord Vareth Ionis, the king who fed nations with decrees and silences. He wore a crown like a brand, his pupils pale from too much candlelight. A murmur rose. Caliph did not need to search for its source. The heat found him first. Arian stood at the periphery, with his hands loosely bound in ceremonial ribbon, not a restraint, merely a reminder. He had been allowed to keep his knife. His eyes flicked up, sun-calm, and for one startled second, Caliph tasted citrus and salt again. as if the boy's gaze poured flavor. "Alpha," intoned Chancellor Oren, whose voice oiled judgments so they would slide farther. "Stand before the court." Caliph obeyed. The mirrored walls threw him into infinity, 1,000 alphas, 1,000 masks. Only one face in that ocean looked alive, and it was not his. "Rumors run like rats," Oren continued. "They whisper that your kitchens ring with undisciplined flame, that standards crack, that a foundling with street tricks has infected the sacred order of taste." A soft laugh slipped from Arian's mouth, almost kind, almost lethal. Caliph did not turn. He kept his gaze on the king. "Standards have not cracked, Chancellor. They have been challenged. And challenge is how steel is tempered." "Steel is tempered by law," snapped Prima Councillor Valith. "Not by street-born boys whose knives glint for applause." The king lifted 2 fingers and the court fell still. "Alpha," he said, voice dry as old parchment, "name this boy." Careful, Caliph thought. Words here had teeth. Once spoken, they bit. "Arian Solvain, your majesty. Taken on contract as temporary artisan under my command." Arian bowed to the king. It looked like insolence dressed as grace. Lord Vareth's gaze moved from Caliph to Arian, an old soldier studying 2 blades. "I have tasted your rule, Alpha. It is clean, efficient, safe." The last word brushed Caliph's ears like ash. But there are days when a king asks to be surprised. Oren leaned forward with a smile that had never been kind. "Then let us be surprised without inviting anarchy. There is precedent for this dilemma." He lifted a parchmented ring book. Seals chimed. When 2 fires contest the same hearth, the law calls for a feast of sovereigns. A ripple passed through the chamber. Hands tightening on scepters, a hiss of silk. Even the mirrors seemed to lean closer. Arian straightened. Caliph could feel the heat purl off him. 2 chefs, Oren intoned, each to prepare 3 courses represented by the pillars of our crown: loyalty, prosperity, mercy. The council will taste, the king will decide. The victor rules the kitchens as culinary sovereign. The other returns to smoke. A pause. In it, the palace counted all the breaths it had ever held. Caliph's chest barely moved. "Accepted," Arian said, every head turned toward him as if dragged. The ribbon around his wrists gleamed like a dare. Oren's smile did not reach his eyes. "The court has not yet offered terms to you, boy." Arian tilted his head. "Then it should, because I name mine." Velith's cane struck marble. "You name nothing." But Lord Vareth's hand lifted again, and the room quieted by instinct. "Speak." Arian's voice was clear, warm, the sound of sun on copper. "If I win, the palace opens its kitchens to every province, apprenticeships for the unsurnamed, the unfavored. The Orison court will taste food cooked by the hungry, not just the polished." A gasp, half scandal, half appetite, trembled the gold. "And if you lose?" Oren asked. "Then the Alpha keeps a safe perfection," Arian said, looking not at the court, not at the king, at Caliph. "And I go back to smoke." Caliph's jaw tightened. He did not allow the court to see the movement. He challenges for the world, and wagers only himself. The thought burned with something like awe and fear. All eyes turned to Caliph now, waiting for law to put its seal on passion. "The Alpha will answer," Lord Vareth said softly. Caliph might have said no. He might have named tradition, precedent, the burden of duty and the sanctity of flame. He might have reminded the court of famine averted, of treaties sealed with pastry and precision, and his name. Instead, he heard himself say, "I accept." The word dropped into the chamber like a coal into dry grass. Fire. It ran across faces, flared in eyes, licked the mirrors. The feast was no longer rumor. It had chosen its hearth. Oren nodded as if he had always known this road would open. "So be it. 3 weeks. Each course will be prepared in the public hall and witnessed by nobles and guild. all ingredients from the crown larder, no beggar's marvels, no street myths. Ariane's smile turned knife-thin. Then you will taste what the streets made of your laws. Valith half rose. Insolent. The king's voice cut him. Enough. He leaned back, face unreadable. Alpha, we entrust you to uphold the sanctity of our tables. Boy, we entrust you to threaten it. May the gods of flame find truth between you. The court stood as one, robes sighing, jewels murmuring. Decrees were recorded, timetables struck. The bronze doors swallowed people by the dozen, until the chamber thinned to echoes and shimmering light. Caliph did not move. He felt Ariane approach long before he heard the footfalls. Heat arrived first, soft as a hand he had refused to take. You shouldn't have accepted, Ariane said quietly beside him, as if they were already alone. They will punish you for letting me stand on your floor. Caliph kept his gaze on his reflection, on the man whose eyes betrayed nothing, whose mouth had been trained to say yes to thrones and no to need. You shouldn't have spoken, he answered. They will punish you for making them feel. Good, Ariane said. Silence. The kind rich in edges. You will lose, Caliph said at last. He heard the harshness in it and could not forgive himself for how much it sounded like warning instead of threat. You cook with hunger, not law. The court does not taste hunger. Then I will feed the king his first honest mouthful, Ariane murmured, and if I burn for it, that will be truth too. He turned to leave, ribbons trailing like sunlit water. Solvain. The name surprised them both. Caliph rarely used names outside of command. Ariane stopped. 3 weeks, Caliph said without looking at him. The larder is crown-locked. My apprentices will be instructed to deny you access without my seal. A soft exhale. Half laugh, half dare. Will you lock the sun too? When Caliph finally glanced over, Ariane was already walking toward the doors. He didn't look back. The chamber dimmed in his absence. It angered Caliph that he noticed. He remained until the last of the courtier's perfume faded. Thunder gathered somewhere behind the mirrors. 3 courses, 3 pillars. Loyalty, prosperity, mercy. Words he had plated 100 ways, none of which had ever trembled his hand. He left the court by a servant's stair and moved through arteries of stone that knew his footsteps better than his heartbeat. The kitchens awaited like a faithful animal. He could have returned to his station, could have drowned doubt in ritual, but his route veered of its own accord, upward, to the terrace. Night had not fully fallen. The sky bled cobalt over Seralune's roofs. The city smouldered, with hearth fires and prayer lanterns. The palace flues exhaled a breath that smelled like memory. Caliph placed both palms on the warm parapet and closed his eyes. Impossible, he had said to the spoon. He had meant the flavor, the heat, the pull. But he knew now what was truly impossible, going back to a world where nothing surprised the king. Footsteps. The soft clack of a door at his back. He did not turn. He did not need to. The air changed, brighter, as if the terrace had been set to the hour of noon. I thought you'd come here, Ariane said. The boy's shadow moved alongside Caliph's on the stone. 2 shapes that did not touch, but leaned. You should not be seen with me after such a decree, Caliph replied. I'm not with you, Ariane said lightly. I'm with the sky. Caliph's mouth almost smiled. Wind rolled the scents of the city up the palace spine. Yeast, rain, cinnamon, iron. They stood a long moment like that, 2 fires studying the same horizon. At last, Caliph said, Loyalty, prosperity, mercy. The first course will be loyalty. They will expect broth, clear, obedient, forgettable. I will give them memory instead, Ariane answered. That is not an ingredient. It is the only one that matters. Caliph turned his head. The boy's profile cut the dim like a blade dipped in light. He believes, Caliph thought, astonished and furious and something softer. He believes and it changes the temperature of a room. You mistake faith for flavor, Caliph said. And you mistake control for love, Arian said without heat. Tell me, Alpha, has your perfection ever made a man kinder? The question landed like a chef's hammer on bone, clean, final. Arian stepped back, giving him the mercy of distance. 3 weeks, he said again, as if it were a promise or a prayer. Try not to starve, Caliph Draven. The door closed behind him. The night swallowed the echo. Caliph did not move for a long time. The city's breaths counted with his. Somewhere below, a bell rang the change of watch. Elsewhere, a woman laughed and a child cried. Life, unruly, went on Seth. He descended at last, each stair a decision. By the time he reached the kitchens, he had chosen the shape of his wall. If Arian meant to flood the court with feeling, Caliph would drown it in flawless tide. He would remind the kingdom why perfection was sacred. It kept disaster at bay. It fed armies with precision. It built peace from measured heat. He would build 3 courses like citadels and seal his heart inside them. He found parchment and ink, rolled his sleeves, and wrote recipes like battle plans. Knife steel sang. Ovens woke. Impossible, he had said to the dark. Very well. He would make it so. He set the first stock to shimmer, clear as a vow, and whispered to the unlit corners of his empire, perhaps to the boy who had already undone him. I will destroy you. And if the oath tasted of salt, no one stood close enough to name it. Night poured over Terraloon like dark honey. The palace roofs shimmered with quiet heat. Furnaces below whispered, alive even in slumber. Yet in the highest kitchen, the terrace kitchen open to the stars, one flame refused to die. Caliph Draven stood before it, sleeves rolled, eyes hollow with purpose. Steam curled against the silver of his hair, painting him in ghostlight. He had spent 3 days rebuilding his precision, measuring, wasting, perfecting, until every motion of his hand was law again. No tremor, no memory, no warmth, but perfection was a lonely religion. Below him, the city breathed, bells tolling faintly, 1,000 windows glowing with supper and laughter. He wondered when food had stopped being joy, when it became obedience. He added the final spice to his broth for loyalty. Transparent as tears, flawless as submission, the taste was clean, too clean. It carried no story, no ache, just control. He exhaled and set the spoon aside. That was when he felt it, the faintest pull of heat not his own. A flicker, almost playful, rippling from the far edge of the terrace. Someone else was cooking. Arian Solvain's fire glowed like sunrise at midnight. He had claimed a corner of the terrace, forbidden, reckless, where copper pots gleamed under moonlight, and the air pulsed with unfamiliar fragrance. Citrus, salt, grief. His hands moved like memory itself, stirring emotion into flame. For a moment, Caliph said nothing. He simply watched the rival who should have been his undoing transform simple ingredients into confession. Each stir looked like forgiveness, each taste like prayer. You are trespassing, Caliph said finally. Arian didn't turn. You are watching. The terrace belongs to me. So does the fire. He smiled faintly. Or do you simply think it listens better to you? Caliph stepped closer, the sound of his boots sharp on stone. The court forbids shared practice before the feast. Arian blew gently on the pot, the flame answering like a lover. Then don't call it practice. What would you call it? Arian looked up, moonlight catching in his eyes. Truth. Silence stretched between them, heavy as syrup. The city wind swept in, carrying spice smoke and music from distant taverns. Caliph's gaze fell to the dish before Arian. A humble stew, nothing like the polished art demanded by the Orison court, yet the smell. It reached him like memory returned from exile. He could taste it without touching it, earth and warmth, bitterness and longing. It tasted like the world outside walls. You think this will win the feast? Caliph asked, voice low. A beggar's broth? I think it will mean something, Arian said, and meaning always tastes better than fear. Caliph's jaw tightened. Meaning doesn't save empires. Maybe empires aren't meant to be saved. That answer hung in the air like lightning. Arian reached for a ladle, dipped it into the pot and extended it. Taste again, if you dare. He should have refused. The alpha chef of Seralune did not taste others' chaos. But his hand lifted, disobedient to reason. The moment the broth touched his tongue, the night shifted. The stars blurred. The terrace expanded. He saw flash at Auchacelles, a mother feeding her child beneath a bridge, a farmer's wife smiling through hunger, a boy with empty hands teaching himself to cook with scraps. Every story Arian carried lived in that single spoonful. Caliph staggered, breath catching. His heartbeat was no longer rhythm. It was percussion. What are you? He whispered. Arian wiped his hands, eyes still on the fire. Someone who remembers what food is for. Caliph swallowed hard. You cook like a poet. Arian laughed quietly. And you rule like a god who's forgotten how to pray. The alpha turned away, furious with himself, with the pull, the pulse, the way truth tasted better than control. He should leave. He should extinguish that illegal fire and return to his calculated perfection. Instead, he found himself standing beside him. Arian didn't protest. He only nudged a second pan toward Caliph. Then pray, he said softly. Show me what devotion looks like. Caliph hesitated, then took the pan. Two fires burned side by side, one blue and disciplined, the other gold and wild. They moved without speaking, rhythm finding rhythm, opposites harmonizing under starlight. When their spoons brushed, the air shimmered silver. Something ancient stirred, a shared heartbeat between flame and flesh. Caliph's magic sought precision. Arian sought freedom. When they met, sparks spiraled skyward, painting light across the heavens like spilled constellations. Stop, Caliph said, voice shaking. They'll see. Then let them, Arian murmured. Maybe they'll remember what wonder looks like. The stew boiled once, violently. And in that pulse of heat, every star above the palace of embers brightened. Caliph and Arian froze. Time hung suspended in the shimmer. The air hummed, alive, full of taste and tension. The flames bent toward each other, like lovers seeking union. What did we just do? Caliph breathed. Something forbidden, Arian said. The stars dimmed slowly, settling back into sky. For a long while, neither moved. The city below slept. The night wind cooled their sweat, carried their secret away across rooftops. Finally, Caliph turned to him. You'll destroy me. Arian smiled, quiet and sad. No, Alpha, I'll remind you. Caliph looked back at the fire, two flames twisting into one, and knew, for the first time in his reign, that perfection would never save him from this. When their magic merged over a pan of molten sugar, the stars themselves shimmered, the first forbidden spark of love. Morning struck the palace of embers like a trumpet. From every spire, banners unfurled, dyed in gold and crimson, the colors of judgment. The feast had come. Courtiers flooded the marble halls, their jewels chiming like nervous hearts. Nobles arrived in silken waves, perfumed with expectation and gossip. The Orison court sat enthroned on their dais of flame and law, their mirrored masks polished to blindness. At the chamber's core, 2 stations, 2 fires. On one side, the alpha of perfection. On the other, the sun-born rebel. Caliph Draven stood in silence, sleeves immaculate, eyes cold as steel. Arian Sylvain faced him across the inferno, wearing no jewels, no crown, only the glint of defiance in his amber gaze. Between them burned the furnaces that had witnessed kings rise and gods fall. The gong struck once. Caliph moved first, every gesture sharp as command. He ladled his clear broth of loyalty into a crystal chalice, each ripple motionless. It caught the light like glass, tasting of obedience and peace. When the judges sipped, they nodded. It was flawless, unfeeling, restrained, divine. Then Arian stepped forward. His version of loyalty was not clear. It was storm-dark, heavy with roasted marrow and ash. Loyalty, he said softly, is not silence. It's the courage to stand when the world burns. The nobles murmured, scandalized. The king's spoon trembled slightly before reaching his lips. The taste hit like memory, iron, sorrow, devotion. Lord Vareth Ionis closed his eyes, and for one fleeting moment, his crown felt heavier. Calith's jaw tightened. Perfection, for the first time, had to compete with truth. For this course, Calith turned to splendor. He built gold towers of pastry filled with jeweled fruits, arranged in mirrored symmetry. Each bite sang of order, of a world that stayed in place because he demanded it to. Arian, by contrast, created chaos on a plate, roasted roots, torn herbs, smoke curling like art. The dish looked alive, unrestrained, imperfect. A counselor whispered, "He mocks us." But when the king tasted it, he murmured, "It tastes like the fields before harvest." Arian smiled faintly, because that's where prosperity begins, not in gold, but in dirt. A silence fell. Even the Orison court couldn't find words sharp enough to cut him. Calith's fingers twitched around his knife. He felt the stir of something unfamiliar. Not hatred, hunger for the way Arian's fire refused to obey. This was the course that decided thrones. The Alpha Chef approached his station as if entering confession. The world watched as he crafted the purest creation of his life, a sugar sphere so delicate it captured its own reflection. Inside, frozen cream infused with lavender tears. He served it to the king with both hands. "This," he said, "is perfection at peace." The king tasted it. "It is flawless," he whispered, yet his tone was mournful, as if flawlessness itself had died in his mouth. Then came Arian. He presented a single bowl, simple, unadorned. Inside, a molten confection that shimmered like dawn trapped in honey. The court sneered. One of the counselors laughed aloud. Until Arian spoke. "Mercy," he said, "isn't what we serve kings. It's what we remember when kings forget to feel." He set the bowl before the king. "It must be shared." He picked up a second spoon and handed it to Calith. The room gasped. The air itself tightened. No one touched an Alpha's dish without decree. Calith hesitated. He could feel the pulse of every gaze, the court's disdain, the king's curiosity, the fire's hunger. Arian's eyes met his. "Taste." And he did. The first spoonful burned his tongue, not with spice, but with memory. It tasted of the night they had shared under the stars, of forbidden warmth, laughter between wounds, a single heartbeat under moonlight. When he exhaled, tears he hadn't earned pricked his eyes. The court stared, thunderstruck. The king lowered his crown slightly, as though ashamed. "This," the monarch said quietly, "is food that reminds us we are still alive." Then the impossible happened. The furnaces of the palace began to tremble, not with anger, but recognition. Their fires twisted upward, forming a spiral of gold light that licked the ceiling. The dishes on the tables quivered, then melted into mist, fragrance blooming into roses, sugar, rain. The Orison court rose in fury. "Sorcery!" Belith shouted. "This is heresy!" But the king remained still, eyes glistening with something older than law. "It is love," he said, and that was when the guards moved. "Seize them both," Orin bellowed, "for defiling the sacred fire." Arian reached instinctively toward Calith, but soldiers poured between them like a wave of metal. Their blades caught the reflected blaze, each point trembling with fear disguised as duty. Calith's instincts took over. He drew the ceremonial knife from his belt, not to kill, but to protect. Flames answered his heartbeat, forming a circle around him. "Stop!" he commanded. His voice was thunder. "You will not touch him." But Arian's hand caught his wrist. "Don't," he said. "You can't fight the law with fire, only with truth." And before Caliph could speak, Arian turned to the king. "Your Majesty," he said, steady, voice raw. "If love is heresy, then let us burn. But let the people taste what we made before we're ash." He lifted his palm toward the flames. They obeyed. Light burst through the hall, molten gold and silver, pouring across marble, swallowing fear. Every guest saw flashes. A starving child fed, a mother smiling, a young chef finding hope in ruin. The fragrance that followed was pure, impossible, infinite. The court fell to its knees. When the light dimmed, the air smelled of sugar and rain. The king's voice broke the silence. "The Alpha and his rival are forbidden to remain, but the fire they birthed will feed our people." And with that decree, the gods led them away, not as prisoners, but as exiles. That night, as the city celebrated the feast that had changed the world, the Palace of Embers wept smoke that smelled like love. Caliph and Arian stood at the edge of the wilderness, watching the lights fade behind them. Neither spoke. The world they'd known had ended, but the flame between them burned quietly on, unafraid. The Orison court branded them heretics of the flame. Soldiers advanced, and magic answered. Smoke crowned the horizon like a broken halo. Behind them, the Palace of Embers sank into twilight, its towers veiled in the sweet sour scent of burnt sugar and grief. Ahead stretched the salt dunes, white, endless, singing softly under the wind. Caliph Draven and Arian Solvane walked without speaking. Chains would have been kinder than silence, but exile preferred its cruelty quiet. The sand glowed faintly, catching the last blush of sunset. Each grain reflected their passing, two fallen stars crossing a desert that did not care for crowns or recipes. By the third night, the cold came. The dunes froze. The stars sharpened. Caliph built a small fire with trembling hands, its light weak against the dark. His fingers, once trained for silver knives, shook as he broke stale bread. Arian watched him from across the flames. "You've never cooked without marble beneath your feet, have you?" Caliph did not answer. He stared into the embers, seeing the reflection of the palace he'd built from pride. "I've never cooked without purpose." "Then tonight," Arian said, "cook for hunger." He tossed a handful of dry herbs into the pot. The scent, wild thyme and dust, rose like a prayer for ordinary things. Caliph hesitated, then added the bread, tearing it with bare hands instead of blades. The fire hissed in approval. When they ate, it was wordless. The soup was thin, uneven, alive. For the first time, perfection tasted small, and imperfection tasted like mercy. Days blurred into salt and wind. They followed the caravan trails where merchants offered stories instead of coin. Villagers brought them ingredients, calling them fire priests, asking for meals to heal the sick and bless the dying. Caliph learned to listen, to the crack of grain, to the sigh of boiling water, to Arian's quiet laughter when the pot refused to obey him. He began to notice how warmth softened his hands, how humility seasoned the air better than spice. One evening, a child approached with an empty bowl and wide eyes. Caliph knelt. He filled it with what little stew remained. The child smiled, whispered thanks, and said, "It tastes like home." Something inside the Alpha unclenched. Later, as they packed their things, Arian murmured, "That was your first honest meal." Caliph looked up. "Honest? You fed someone without trying to prove you're a god." Their tents grew closer as the nights grew colder. They shared warmth, stories, silence. Sometimes Arian would hum as he worked, melodies that reminded Caliph of rain. Other nights, Caliph would wake to find Arian asleep by the coals, a faint glow circling his palms, sunlight trapped in mortal skin. One dawn, when the horizon blazed gold, Arian said, We could stay here, build a kitchen for those who have none. Caliph studied him. You'd trade a kingdom for a tent? I already did, Arian said simply. Caliph almost smiled. And what would we call this place? Arian shrugged. Ash and gold, the ruins of what was, and the beginning of what might be. The seventh night came with thunder. A lone rider approached from the east, cloaked in the sigil of the Orison court. Arian reached for his knife, but Caliph's hand stopped him. If they wanted blood, they'd send a legion. The messenger dismounted and bowed low, voice trembling. By decree of King Varathionis, he said, the Palace of Embers burns uncontrolled. The sacred furnaces devour themselves. The court begs the Alpha to return. Only your fire can quell the storm. Caliph closed his eyes. The wind carried the faintest echo of crackling flame, his home crying out. Arian touched his arm. They banished you, now they beg. They need me, Caliph said, but his voice held no pride, only exhaustion. If the palace falls, Seraluni loses its heart. Then we go, Arian answered. Together. The messenger hesitated. The decree names the Alpha alone. Arian's smile was sunlight breaking through ash. Then tell your king the sun travels where it pleases. At dawn, they stood atop the final ridge. Below them, the capital smouldered, embers painting the sky with gold and sorrow. Caliph's hand tightened around Ariane's. If we return, there will be no mercy. Ariane's eyes shone like dawn. Then let there be truth. Together, they walked toward the burning horizon. A messenger arrives with a sealed decree. The Palace of Embers is collapsing, and only the Alpha can save it. The wind over Seralune carried the sound of ruin. Flames bent like dancers across the rooftops. Embers rained over marble domes, once white as prayer. From the high road of exile, Caliph Draven and Arian Solvane descended toward the dying city, their boots sinking into ash that used to be gardens. The Palace of Embers loomed ahead, a wounded god bleeding light. No banners greeted them, no guard saluted. The gates had melted into black glass. Inside, corridors once perfumed with saffron now stank of smoke and fear. Servants scurried like ghosts clutching buckets of sand. Somewhere beyond the walls, the sacred furnaces howled. Caliph paused before the main hall. The carved sigil of his title, Alpha, had split down its center. It's dying, Ariane murmured beside him. You can still stop it. Caliph's eyes hardened. No, we can. Together they stepped into the inferno. The grand kitchen had become a storm of light and metal. The furnaces, once loyal, rebelled, fire leaping from vent to vent, devouring its own makers. Caliph lifted his hands and whispered the words every Alpha was taught in childhood, spells of control, of order, of command. The flames ignored him. Arian stepped forward, eyes narrowed, listening. They're not angry, he said. They're scared. Fires do not feel. Yours did. The words cut deeper than smoke. Arian closed his eyes, breathing with the fire's rhythm. It's your heartbeat they're echoing. You've been burning since the feast. Caliph turned away. Then extinguish me. I'd rather teach you to breathe. They worked without speaking. Caliph drew runes of containment in flower dust, while Ariane scattered herbs across the floor, creating scent to calm the inferno. Rosemary for memory, salt for protection, honey for forgiveness. The fire responded to him, bowing slightly. When Caliph tried to join his energy with Ariane's, something shifted, like two melodies trying to share one key. The air cracked, a furnace door exploded, shards slicing through the air. Caliph moved before thought, pulling Ariane down. A blade of steel flashed past, cutting Caliph's shoulder. Blood spilled, bright as pomegranate. Caliph. Ariane pressed his palm to the wound. The contact sent warmth radiating outward, magic uncoiling between them, fierce and fragile. Their energies tangled, Flames froze mid-air, then swayed like grass in wind. For a heartbeat, the inferno bowed. Before they could breathe, a voice echoed through the chamber. Enough. Lord Vareth Ionis stepped from the smoke, his robe singed, his crown gone. The monarch's eyes glowed with exhausted power. You disobeyed exile, he said softly. You come to rescue a kingdom that cast you out. Calith bowed his head. Not for your crown, my lord, for the fire. The king's lips curled. You think the fire can be tamed again? It burns because you lied to it. You fed it perfection, not truth. Now it consumes the false god who built it. He raised his hand. Magic gathered, a tide of royal flame, older than the Alpha bloodline itself. Arian stepped in front of Calith. Then burn me first. Vareth hesitated. You'd die for him? Arian's gaze didn't waver. I already did, the day I loved him. The king lowered his arm, trembling. Then save what you've destroyed. If the fire obeys you, perhaps mercy still lives. He vanished into smoke. They moved deeper into the inferno's core, the chamber that birthed the first flame of Seraloon. The heat was unbearable. The walls dripped molten gold. Arian faltered. It's too strong. Calith gritted his teeth. Stay behind me. No, Arian said, voice breaking. This is our making, and it will be our unmaking if we face it apart. He reached for Calith's hand. The Alpha hesitated, but when their fingers met, the entire chamber roared to life. Light erupted around them, not destructive but divine. Fire purified into song. It poured through every corridor, consuming pain, pride, and fear. When the brilliance faded, silence followed. The palace stood still, breathing. Arian lay motionless beside the main furnace, smoke curling from his skin. His eyes fluttered open, barely. Did it stop? Calith knelt, lifting him gently. Yes, the fire's at peace. Arian smiled weakly. Then we did it. He reached for something at his belt, Calith's ceremonial knife, half melted from the heat. Keep it, Arian whispered. You'll need it to open the world again. Calith's hand shook. Don't speak like that. But Arian's pulse was faint, his magic almost gone. I told you I'd remind you what it means to feel. Promise me you won't forget. Calith pressed his forehead to Arian's. Never. Arian's eyes closed. His body shimmered, turning to light, to warmth, to air. The last words left his lips like breath over fire. Live for flavor. Then he was gone. Calith sat in the stillness, the knife cooling in his grasp. Around him, the palace walls pulsed with calm, the fire reborn, steady, breathing. He should have felt triumph. Instead, he felt hunger, the kind no feast could sate. He rose slowly, blood still drying on his sleeve, and faced the horizon. Outside, dawn broke over Seraloon, rays of gold cutting through smoke. The city would live, the fire would endure. But half his heart had burned to save it. Calith tastes the abandoned dish, and finds his own tears in its salt. Dawn painted the city in quiet gold. Smoke still rose from the palace of embers, but it no longer screamed. It sighed, as if the great structure itself had taken its first peaceful breath in centuries. Inside the restored silence, Calith Draven walked alone. His footsteps echoed against scorched marble, the halls stripped of opulence and pride. Where once banners of perfection hung, only soot remained. In his hand, he carried Arian Solvain's half-melted knife, the last thing that still held his warmth. The kitchens were ruins. Copper pots lay twisted, counters shattered, spices turned to dust. Yet one station still stood, Arian's. A pan of charred sugar rested there, hardened into glass. Calith ran a gloved finger over it. It crackled faintly, releasing the scent of burnt honey and memory. He whispered, I should have saved you. The air stirred. Somewhere deep within the vents, a faint echo answered. No words, only warmth. Calith's throat tightened. He turned toward the furnaces. Then I'll finish what you began. He set the knife on the counter, the metal reflecting both his face and the firelight. A man divided by grief and glory. Caliph opened the ancient grimoire of royal cuisine, the same one that had chained generations of chefs to the will of kings. He tore out every page. "Perfection has killed enough," he muttered. Then he began to write, not in ink but in flame. Each line of the forbidden recipe burned itself into the marble. One heart broken, one heart remembered, fire that forgives, sugar that speaks truth. He gathered ingredients like relics, molten amber, starlight salt, a single drop of his own blood. The fire watched him, curious. When he whispered Arian's name, the flames flared gold instead of red. "I need your warmth, sir," he sighed, "just once more." And the fire answered. Heat filled the chamber, fierce but tender. The air thickened with scent, orange peel, cinnamon, and rain on stone. Caliph stirred the mixture until it glowed like dawn caught in glass. When he tasted it, his vision blurred. The world fell away. He saw Arian standing before him, not as flesh, but as light. Sunfire eyes, ash on his hands, a smile soft as truth. "You always did overcomplicate flavor," Arian said, voice a melody between laughter and goodbye. Caliph's breath broke. "You..." "Shh." Arian stepped closer, translucent but radiant. "This isn't life. It's remembrance. The fire kept my essence, your fire. You called, and I answered." Caliph's tears hissed on the hot marble. "Stay." "I can't, but you can finish the dish." "How?" "Together." Arian reached for him. Their hands met, not skin to skin, but spark to spark. The ingredients rose from the counter, swirling between them, liquid gold folding into sugar crystals, sugar dissolving into flame. When the last light sank into the bowl, it solidified, one crystalline confection, perfect and alive. Caliph lifted it reverently. Inside the glass, faint sunlight pulsed like a heartbeat. The forbidden recipe was complete. By dusk, the king himself arrived, guided by whispers of miracles. The Orison court followed, robes singed, dignity cracked. They found the alpha chef, standing before a single dish glowing softly on the counter. "What is this?" the king asked. "Redemption," Caliph said. He offered the confection. "Taste it, Majesty, and remember what we forgot." The king hesitated, then broke the sugar shell. Light spilled out, warm, soft, endless. The scent filled the hall, reaching even the streets beyond the palace. Every man, woman, and child in Ceraloon felt it. Love, hunger, forgiveness, woven together into one pure note. Tears rolled down the king's face. "What have you done?" "I've fed the world the truth," Caliph whispered. The furnaces roared one last time, but this time it wasn't destruction. It was rebirth. The flames climbed the ceiling, spiraling into a vast column of light that tore open the roof. From it descended warmth, spreading across the city. The poor felt it in their bones, the rich in their hearts. The people of Ceraloon lifted their faces and wept. Arian's laughter, distant, golden, rippled through the fire. Caliph stood within the storm of light, his body burning, his heart calm. "You're free," he whispered. The fire dimmed, the world glowed, then silence. When dawn returned, the Palace of Embers was whole again, but empty. The kitchens gleamed, untouched. The fires burned steady, peaceful. Of Caliph Draven, no trace remained, save for one glimmering confection placed at the center of the marble counter, pulsing faintly with warmth. The inscription below read, "The Forbidden Recipe." Love is the only flavor that does not fade. The fire transforms into light, revealing the divine truth that love, not mastery, fuels creation. Centuries later, the people of Ceraloon still spoke of the day the sky burned gold. They said the sun itself had descended to taste the world's sorrow and turned it sweet. They said two chefs, one of fire, one of light, had vanished within that brilliance, leaving behind a single recipe that no one could read, yet everyone could feel. The Palace of Embers stood restored, quiet, and sacred. Its furnaces burned lower now, not as tyrants, but as guardians. The flames no longer devoured, they remembered. On every feast of sovereigns, the king's descendants gathered before the great kitchen to perform the ritual of tasting. The recipe had no written instructions, only a name etched into the marble, the forbidden recipe. Each year, a new chef tried to recreate it. Each year, they failed. The flavors were always beautiful, but hollow. Perfect, but soulless. Because what Caliph Draven and Arian Solvane had created could not be built from ingredients alone. It needed love willing to burn. Still, the ritual endured, as if the act itself fed something unseen. One night, long after the court had retired, a young apprentice named Lyrian Vale snuck into the ancient kitchens. She was barely 16, her tunic too large, her curiosity larger still. She had heard stories all her life about the alpha who cooked lightning, about the boy who fed kings with feeling, about a fire that sang. She didn't believe in myths, but she believed in hunger. Lyrian lit a single lamp. The flame stirred gently, as if recognizing the living. She approached the center counter, smooth marble, faintly glowing beneath the dust. Someone had left a knife there long ago, blackened by age. She traced its edge and whispered, "Teach me." The air warmed, the lamp flickered, and then she heard it, a faint echo, half flame, half memory. Two voices overlapping like a chord. Perfection is silence, but love is sound. Lyrain froze. The words came not from the room, but from inside her chest. Guided by instinct, or perhaps by ghosts, she gathered what she had: sugar, salt, milk, and a drop of her own blood from a nervous cut. She cooked clumsily, humming without realizing. The melody felt ancient. It wasn't hers. The fire leaned closer. When the mixture began to boil over, she panicked, until she heard a man's voice, low and steady, the tone of command softened by wonder. "Caliph, breathe, child. Fire obeys rhythm, not fear." And then another voice, bright as sunrise. "Arian, let it dance. Don't cage it. Feel what it wants to become." Tears blurred Lyrain's eyes. She stirred once more, and the air shimmered gold. The scent that rose was beyond language, rain on old parchment, laughter through grief, warmth on the coldest night. The fire whispered again, "You've remembered." The next morning, the palace awoke to a fragrance that drifted through every corridor. Nobles followed it to the great kitchen. There they found Lyrian asleep by the counter, a small glass confection glowing faintly beside her. The king, now an old man whose hands trembled from time, approached and lifted it. He took one bite and wept. "It tastes," he said softly, "like mercy." That night the city bells rang for no reason. The sky brightened, not with flame, but with aurora. Two silhouettes shimmered in the northern light above the palace, one cloaked in fire, the other in gold. They did not speak. They simply watched. The Alpha and the Sun's heir, while the next generation learned to cook by heart, not by rule. Their story, their love, had become the world's pulse. Centuries later, travelers still come to Ceraloon, seeking the scent that lives on the wind. Some say it comes from the palace, others from the sea, but the wise know the truth. Every kitchen where someone cooks with love, every hand trembling as it stirs, not for mastery, but for meaning. That is where the forbidden recipe awakens again. For love, once tasted, can never be forgotten. And the gods of flame, it is said, still whisper one name into every hearth they bless: Caliph and Arian, the taste of eternity. A young chef tastes sweetness on the wind and whispers, "The Alpha still burns for his son."